Wedding vows include all that jazz about standing by each other through sickness and health. But did anyone ever say anything about pedophilia? Because that's hard to imagine. But we are about to talk to an Oregon couple, Gary Gibson, who is a self-proclaimed pedophile, and his wife, Tabitha Abel. They are together, and she stands by him, despite the fact that Gibson has been attracted to underage girls for more than half a century.
I never called myself a pedophile, but for 50 years, more than 50 years, I've been sexually attracted to little girls. I choose not to act on it. I'm not exclusive, so it's pretty easy for me to pretend I was, a regular, normal adult male.
He says it is a struggle for him not to act on his desires. And those desires, as difficult as it is to say, include having sex with young girls, not teenage girls, young girls. Gibson has set up a not-for-profit to help people like him who choose and try not to act on their pedophile urges. Gary Gibson and Tabitha Abel join me live now from Portland, Oregon. Thank you to both of you for agreeing to be on the show, because I know this is not an easy topic, and I know that you have both been under a lot of fire online. But Gary, I got to ask you about this idea that you choose not to act on your desires and have done so for 50 years. I think a lot of people watching would find that very difficult to believe. Is it true you have never acted on those desires with little girls?
It is true that I have never abused a child.
What is your definition of abusing a child?
That is really the question. A child, defined by the DSM, is under prepubescent children under the age of 14 is what we're talking about with child sexual abuse. Sexual has more meaning than just intercourse. It could mean touching. It could involve looking at pornography. I've never looked at child pornography. I've never penetrated a child for sexual purposes. The question that I struggle with, and it's really not a struggle for me not to have sex with a little girl. It's quite easy, just as it is for a heterosexual adult who's attracted to women. It's not like they're going to rape every woman they meet. So it's not really a struggle. It's just the struggle is more because I want to maintain a virtuous life in my mind as well. So I don't like the thoughts that come. They're not mine. I don't choose to dwell on them. I don't choose fantasies. So I reject them. That's what I mean by it.
But I think, again, I think a lot of people would say it's extraordinary, and to bring up your example of a heterosexual person doesn't rape every person they meet, but the heterosexual person does have sex, especially over a 50-year period, because it is extraordinarily difficult to maintain chastity for that long with those desires. And I was just drawn to something that you said.
That's why it's probably easier for me.
Okay, but I want to bring up something that you yourself said in that tape that we played earlier. You said, I knew I was attracted to little girls. I was always a little close. Maybe I hugged them too tight or did some things I shouldn't have done, but I never penetrated a child, never what I would call had sex with a child. I have to ask you, sir, what is it when you say you never did, or you did some things that you shouldn't have done? What things did you do?
Well, Tabitha always says that I'm too sensitive about it. But I recognize that when I hug a child, a hug is not abuse. But if I hug the child too long or too tight, I feel sensitive that maybe I've done something that somebody would think was inappropriate. So
that's
you're looking at on my...
But that's it? You did say I probably hugged children too long or did some things I shouldn't have done. Did it go beyond hugging them a little tightly?
No.
Okay. What about the idea that you said I have never, what I would call, had sex with a child, never penetrated? There is a lot more to child sexual abuse than penetration. There is molestation. There is groping. There are many categories that are traumatic for children and are very illegal. So what are you talking about when you say you've never gone so far as to penetrate a child? Have you done other things in that category, like molested or touched a child inappropriately?
So the difficulty in answering your question is that if I say I've never done anything, nobody's going to believe me. If I say, which I did on this show this morning, another show, I admitted that when I was a child, when I was 12, going through puberty, spending the summer with my cousins, the boy who was my age taught me to play doctor with his sisters. And so then a guy came on and said that I had offended. Well, most reasonable people understand that children experiment and look and touch each other. And that's what I mean by not penetrating.
Okay, I understand.
By touching what we would term playing doctor, examining, which I think is wrong and inappropriate. I've apologized. But if somebody wants to fault me for what happened 54 years ago, they can. But to me, what I mean is that I'm endeavoring to live a virtuous life now, and that's what the group Virtuous Pedophiles means. It's not that we're perfect.
Okay.
So I'm willing to admit that, some people looking at me think I might be over the top, too close.
I understand where you're coming from. I want to ask Tabitha. I'm sure this is not a comfortable experience for you to be not only seated on live television beside your husband as he says these things, but you have been very open about supporting him and believing in him. And even though your husband has admitted that throughout the generations of his family there has been terrible pedophilia and sexual abuse of children and incest, you still fully believe your husband. You have 100% faith that he has not offended in that way. He has not abused young girls and will not in the future?
Well, that is my belief. And, I think a lot of people will say, well, I'm very naive. Of course, I am not with him all the time, and I wasn't with him. We have been married 11 years. So, there is nothing that one can say with certainty. I believe what he's saying. And I think we need to recognize that for someone to come forward and say they have a sexual attraction to children and they have not acted on it, I think that's a very bold thing to say, particularly if you're not doing it. I wouldn't even know it. I would not know that this was going on in his head. But we both feel that this is where we need to stand up to help those that have that sexual attraction and enable them to get help, because at the present time this is such a taboo subject. Nobody is going to help them. There are serious consequences if a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 32-year-old, whether they're married or they're single kids or whatever, should say that, because people do not understand being sexually attracted to children doesn't mean you're acting on it.
Let me ask, well, and that's the key, and the belief. I mean, it takes an enormous amount of faith, given the circumstances and the science and, empirical data about pedophilia to have that faith in your husband. And sir, I want to ask you about an incident in your family's past. A foster child of yours at 10 years old reported that you had touched her inappropriately, that there had been molestation, and you at the time accused that child of having false memories. Two questions there.
I wasn't accusing her.
Let me ask you suggested that she had false memories, and I want to ask you.
I know that what she said did not happen.
Okay, is it possible you have false memories?
No. And I don't think that she deliberately lied or tried to make something up. But I do know that when she was with us, the Child Protective Services pressured her on occasions to come up with something, and one time she came up with another story that I had left them off, walked off in the woods without the kids, left them alone.
Mr. Gibson, you have to understand that given the circumstances, it is very difficult to believe that. It is awfully coincidental that You've had the family history. You've said that you've been attracted to children for 50 years, that you've done some things you shouldn't have done and never what you call had sex with a child, and a foster child of yours at 10 years old said you did touch her, and you're suggesting it's a false memory. You have to understand that that is extraordinary for people to believe.
I understand. She did not mention that until 3 years later. And she has
children often won't mention it for decades. I mean, that is a proven science.
I understand.
That's why statutes of limitations have been expanded for decades. You understand that as well?
Yes, I do. And she reconnected with us recently and assured me that she felt comfortable that it had not happened, that I had never done anything that made her feel uncomfortable. Now, you can go to her and pressure her, just like CPS does sometimes, like a counselor would, because in the 1980s, that happened very frequently. And now people looking back realize that many counselors thought that a child had been abused. Myself, I was not abused, but a counselor spoke to me in the 1980s and insisted that I must have been abused by my mother. I told her, she said no, and then the counselor said, oh, you're both in denial. But I know that I was not abused, and I don't believe that this girl really thought that I was.
I understand your point, but you know, there are repressed memories, and there are people who are very good at their jobs who are able to dig deep with children, and after many years of counseling and appropriate questioning, actually unearth repressed memories. So it can go both ways.
Yes.
But I do have to say, I appreciate both of you doing this interview. It is a difficult subject. I think there are a lot of people who will be gritting their teeth right now in anger and hate, and even more curious about what it is you have to say. I hope we get a chance to speak again sometime, because this is a crisis in this country. It is a crisis around the world, and I think there is a need for more light. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A grandfather busted for pot cookies in the car. And before you think, well, so what? He certainly does have a story, but the Texas trooper was not buying it. And then there's this.